Good morning and welcome to my weekly live broadcast. And what I was thinking about this morning, I'm going to do kind of a shortened presentation, but on a very central topic to my whole thinking and my whole extended study project. But it is something we will revisit. I just wanted to lay down some foundations here, and the topic is really on the concept or the idea of a calling. People talk about having a calling in their life, or they're called to do something, or things along those lines. And let me just I'm going to turn on. I have some handwritten notes here on my iPad. Let me just turn that onto my screen so I can follow my own sequence of thoughts here. And the topic, as I say, it relates to my larger project. Let me just go to my first little note here. My larger project is, well, today's topic, as I say, is on what is my calling at an individual level. But to look at that in the context of my overall project, the name of my study project is The Physician's Highest and Only Calling. And if you are a Heilkünstler like me, that will be a very familiar phrase to you. It's the very opening to Dr. Hahnemann's Organon. And it's a phrase that I go back to over and over again. Of course, I've read his whole book several times, but there is just something about that opening phrase which is always called to me, no pun intended, but there's something so rich in those words and the concepts, and that being the opening to his whole medical system. Now, today, we are going to not be talking about Heilkunst and the principles of medicine. This isn't a medical lecture, but I want to take everything that I've been studying in medicine and apply it to this broader topic of a calling in really anyone's life. This is kind of more of a principle of living and really connecting to your highest purpose and your highest meaning in life and things like that. But just to set the context for this phrase from Hahnemann's medical textbook, The Physician's Highest and Only Calling, that, as I say, is in the very first aphorism of the Organon. I don't have that open in front of me. I can't read that whole sentence, but essentially the idea that he opens the Organon with, his immediate meaning is in the medical context and what the doctor or the physician needs to do as far as really being keyed in to their purpose as far as serving their patient. He's about to lay out a whole system of cure, and how the physician's role, or their calling, their job, is really to cure the patient and to do it in a safe and gentle way, and all the things he lays out about medicine. But if we just forget all the part about medicine for now and just come back to this original phrase, or these original words, the physician's highest and only calling, and even for our purposes today, let's even X out the word physician. Let's talk about anyone's highest and only calling and what that's all about, and where we really tap into that in ourselves, or where that even comes from. So, as I say, will not be a complete exploration of this topic. We could spend several hours, or probably a several-day seminar just on really diving into this, but I just want to lay out a few of the basic foundations here. So, as I said, the origin of this phrase comes from Hahnemann and his system of medical Heilkunst, but I want to take the principles that I'm learning and I'm studying in medicine and expand those out to where they really can reach into anybody's life, anybody's path, especially when we're on this path of a calling, or trying to find it, or once we have found it, trying to unfold it and trying to figure out what to do with it. But anyways, as I say, I want to really expand the context out from medical Heilkunst to life in general. So on the word calling itself, and this very much relates to the medical principles, but it's much more broadly applicable as well. The word calling relates to the master principle of resonance. And again, resonance, just like calling, these are words, or these are concepts that we could really spend a long time really unpacking them, but we'll stick to fairly basic definitions for now. But starting with this master principle of resonance, It's interesting because the word calling, of course, relates to our sense of hearing. You hear somebody call your name, or you call out, or there's that whole kind of auditory sense to that word. And likewise, this related concept of resonance, we can also begin our definition of resonance with this kind of auditory concept of, well, let's even use one of the variations of the word resonance, to resound, right? For something to resound or something to be resonant is, relates to this whole sense of our auditory sense, or the sense of hearing. And more specifically, just let me take a sip of water so that my voice can be as resonant as it may be. Um, this principle of resonance kind of has a duality within it. And as I have here on my written hand notes, the the dual principle that resonance breaks down to is consonance and dissonance. So right away, we kind of get a really important clue. We talk about resonant relationships or resonant activities in our life, or things that we feel resonant with, resonant topics that we like studying, or things like that. And as I say, within that polarity of consonance and dissonance, there's already a really big clue that um, things are not all as Allison would like to say, things are not always unicorns and rainbows and straight to California. In other words, things aren't always easy and harmonious, but every harmony in the musical sense has a consonant aspect and has a dissonant aspect. Or if you follow the harmony in a piece of music, from one chord to the next, that's usually what a very good piece of music will do. It's not all consonants, but it has just enough dissonance to kind of have some, keep some interest in the music. Some tension, some things that don't feel good immediately or all on their own, but not until we come back to the consonants does that resonance really play itself out in its fullness. So it's the same with life and the same with relationships. We kind of go through more expansive phases and contractive, within a given relationship, or within a given activity that we're engaged with. And this kind of polarity of the consonance and the dissonance, it really gives that movement to life, that expansion and the contraction. It's really that movement of life. It's not just that we find something and we just sit there without moving, but we're kind of in this back and forth, or expansive and contractive kind of movement. So anyways, to have a calling or to have a resonance, they're kind of two ways of saying very similar things. They're interrelated. Just always remember this idea of movement, or the expansion and the contraction, which keeps resonance kind of as a living concept rather than just that dead static thing that just sits there, as I say. So as I've already been talking a little bit about sound and music, let's go a little bit deeper into some musical examples. And my first thought, or my first example about music is general, but I think we can all relate to this in our own way, is you can take any given genre of music, rock and roll, country, jazz, whatever, opera, whatever all the different musical genres are. And of course, not everyone loves every genre. Of course, many people are, have multiple interests in music. They listen to a wide variety. But when it comes to the kind of music that really lights us up, that's getting more and more into our unique individuality. So just to use myself as an example, I remember the point in my life where I discovered jazz. I know it's not the most popular genre. I mean, it has its following, of course, but relative to mainstream music as a whole and popular music as a whole, it kind of is a very, very small sliver. Anyways, it's not about a popularity contest, but my point here being is that any given genre of music is going to be resonant for a certain subgroup of people, right? So you can imagine if you go and stand outside of a concert hall, an auditorium, a stadium, a concert hall, where a certain concert is happening, jazz, country, rock and roll, whatever, a certain concert is happening, and you can imagine, even without being inside and even without going inside, we could, like, just by knowing that given genre of music, we can kind of imagine in our mind as a group of people what the common characteristics we're going to find of people who have resonated with that particular music. So, the jazz people, I'll put myself on the spot here, they're going to be a little bit more counterculture there. And more specifically, the real thing that grabs me about jazz, what has to do with my personality and, how I like to relate to life and relate to studying and things like that. There's this really unique thing about jazz where it brings the elements of structure. There's definitely a structure behind jazz, but it also brings in this element of how we spontaneously create within a structure. So, I've got, again, not just jazz, but we do this in life in general. We have friends and relationships, and we have conversations, and there's a structure, but there's also a spontaneity. And when there's that nice sweet spot between the two, a real kind of living activity is happening, within that conversation or within a relationship, within a jazz piece, whatever it is. Anyways, I'm getting a little bit down a rabbit hole or a tangent here, but just this whole idea of the genres of music, they are going to relate to each individual's calling. So, why you like certain genres, certain pieces of music, things like that, relates to the uniqueness of each genre of music. And the other really specific example I want to give, this one kind of burned its way into my memory a number of years ago, and this was when our kids were young, and there's almost a 4-year difference in age between the two of them, and there was this moment where the older one, he was, I forget his exact age at that time. He was maybe 10 or 11 years old, somewhere in that range. And he was in his bedroom, and he was, playing with his radio, and he was listening to some music. And there was, this very particular kind of rock genre that was on. And this was a moment in his life where suddenly that genre of rock and roll could kind of speak to him in its fullness for the first time. He was kind of at that, just, verging on prepubescence, and some of the whole consciousness that's beginning at that phase of our life is really the time where rock and roll really begins to make sense. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? That phrase. But that whole thing, that whole moment of, being at the threshold of puberty, he was hearing that rock and roll genre, as if it was fresh, as if like he was understanding it for the first time. And he called his younger sister, over from her bedroom to his. He said, "Addie, come listen to this." It was like the most amazing revelation he had ever heard. And she kind of listened for a few moments, and she said, "That's cool, Jordan." She went back to her room. She kind of wasn't at that phase of development where that meaning of rock and roll could really call to her. Right. But for him, it was very alive, very vivid, and very real. So anyways, for me, this is such a vivid example, music in general, and this example I just gave you, because a calling, as I say, we relate to that from our auditory sense, as I'm saying. We hear music and we hear our name being called and all of these kinds of things. But of course, a calling goes way beyond the auditory sense, but it's just such a vivid way for us to relate to what it means to have a calling and to be called and all of those things. So to take it into a slightly different dimension, we have, when we have a calling, or when we, in my specific example here, when what I call the power of naming, when we name something, or when we give a name to something, or, of course, if we're parents, we give a name to our children, or if we are, into our more specific topic here, where, when we discover our own calling, it's like we're kind of discovering our own name in a sense, or we're discovering that word or that set of ideas or concepts which really draw us in, which really call to us. So the second point I have on this little note here, is what I'm saying here. The naming, or the ability to identify and follow your desire. That's one aspect of it. Or to go back to our medical context again, just as an example, I think we all know, either for ourselves or someone close to us, when it comes to a medical condition, the very most powerful experience that someone can have is to go to a physician and to be given a true diagnosis, right? Of course, this could be a whole side topic. I'm not going to go into it here, but, that gets us into the whole sub issue of, whether the diagnosis is correct or whether it's a false diagnosis and all these things. But ignoring that for the moment, when the diagnosis is true, it is a very, very powerful experience. It's like, yeah, we know, as far as at the medical level, we know what that means, what we'll have to do, what the course of treatment will be, how we come to correct that medical issue and bring us back into our true state of health. Anyways, that's a whole side topic, but it relates to this idea of calling. When you hear it, when you tap into it, it's just like a true diagnosis in medicine. Now what is that path you have to follow to kind of unfold yourself and bring more and more truth into that part of your life or that activity of your life. And just a moment. I'm going to bring a German word into our discussion here. The word is Beruf, and why we're all English speakers here, but why am I talking about a German word? Well, it's one of these instances where a word in one language doesn't translate perfectly well into another language. It's like people who are multilingual, they kind of learn this in a very intimate way. It's like they know, it's like, oh yeah, I'd be better off over here in this language because this expresses the idea or the feeling that I have in my mind right now. But in this case, the German word Beruf, in a common mundane way, it kind of translates to the English word of career, but we want kind of a broader meaning of that. And the German word, it doesn't only have that meaning of career, but it kind of has this more esoteric meaning of what is somebody's higher calling. Right. So in the mundane level, it's, yeah, what is your day-to-day job? What is your career? What does your alarm clock call you out of bed in the morning to go and do from 9 to 5? It's like, okay, that's a mundane meaning of Baruf. But as I say, at that higher meaning, it has that what we're tapping into of this higher calling. And what's interesting, if you break down the etymology of the German word Beruf, the root, the roof part, RUF, that taps more into that sense of to call or to be called, or calling, again, in our auditory sense, or again, our higher esoteric sense. That in the German word of Beruf, or career, it kind of has this deeper implication. And people, even in English or any language, they're always striving for this. It's like, well, I have a job, I have a day job, but my hobby is, I do music, or I do art, or I do this or that thing. And it's, we have this sense, if we're not in a job that represents our higher calling, we're still always looking for it, in our free time, our weekends, or what have you. So in German kind of retains that dual sense of, the mundane sense of career versus the higher calling. But as I say, even if we don't have that exact word, we still have that sense within ourselves in English or any language that even if we haven't found it yet, or our job doesn't do it for us, we're still looking for that. So I'll kind of end on this idea or this topic, and to really tap into the deepest sense of our calling, or to be called. If we again look at this higher esoteric sense, or even a spiritual sense, as it were, the idea of to be called, like when we look at, I guess, the classic question that little children ask, they ask their parents, where do babies come from? And that's a great question. It's an innocent question. It's a powerful question, but of course, often the answer that's given, depending on the age of the child. But we get more into kind of a mechanistic kind of approach to reproduction. Is, we talk about, well, the sperm meets the egg, and daddy gives the sperm to the mummy, and all the way we talk to children about these things, but we generally miss kind of this higher meaning of where children and babies really come from. In this higher esoteric sense, they're kind of called into their given life, their given incarnation, by a couple at a particular time, who at one level or another, whether unconsciously or not, they're calling this new spirit being to come into their midst. So there's a little bit of a resonance dialogue going on between the couple and this new being that's going to come into their midst. And what's within all of that new baby, in a sense, they've already brought their own calling into this life, right? They didn't learn about it in school. Their teacher didn't tell them what they should be. Of course, we always hear the stories about people who grow up and, oh, my parents wanted me to be this profession or that profession, but then they get to a point in their life where they dig down below that and find their true calling. Well, in a sense, is say we're not given our calling from our parents or our teachers or anything like that, but we come into this world already, with that already built into us. So if nothing else, our job is to kind of unpack that and discover what that is inside of us, not just make it up or invent it, or have somebody tell us what it is or whatever. Anyway, as I say here, yeah, we given that our calling is kind of already baked in, we already come with it. It's what did I write here? It's incarnating into a given family, a given time and place, to take part in a certain phase of human history, so that our given individual calling is given kind of the best conditions for unfolding whatever it is, and whatever, wherever it's going to be given the best voice, or the opportunity to find that voice. So that's, as I say, that's kind of my very brief introduction to this topic. We will certainly come back to it and delve into any of these aspects in a lot more depth. But I just kind of wanted to plant some seeds and kind of lay the foundations for this. So thank you for joining me this morning, or if you're watching this as a replay, I will be continuing this series of not only the topic of calling and resonance, but the whole web of topics around dynamic science and dynamic medicine. And wherever you're watching this right now, just stay tuned to that channel, and I will be coming back at you before we know it. So thanks again, and have a good day.